Good evening to the night owls. Good afternoon to the day walkers. And good morning to the rising dead. Welcome to Classified Culture. If you enjoy science fiction and horror stories, then you've come to the right channel. Our goal is to provide quality and original stories for listeners on a regular basis. Every day there will be at least one or two new stories for your listening pleasure. Help this channel grow as a community. You can help by sharing this video, giving it a like, leaving a message in the comments section, and subscribing to the channel. Your feedback and support is always appreciated. Well, I suppose that's enough said for now. It's time for me to do what you all have been waiting for. It's time to let the words I speak guide your imagination with a dark and twisted tale. Dexter Wellwood had spent years chasing whispers of ancient artifacts hidden deep within the heart of uncharted lands. The Sunless Canyon, as it was named by some cartographer who'd glimpsed its depths and fled, promised a trove unlike any other. Yet here he stood at twilight's edge, staring into an abyss that seemed to stare back with malicious intent. His boots crunched on gravel underfoot, each step echoing louder than usual in the oppressive silence. The canyon walls loomed high above them like specters leaning in for a closer look. They were narrow this close to the entrance, but grew wider and deeper the further they ventured, until sunlight became merely hearsay. Westley Castle, Dexter's eager yet anxious assistant, fidgeted beside him, flashlight trembling slightly as he swept its beam across the yawning chasm ahead. "Are you sure about this?" His voice cracked despite his efforts to keep it steady. Dexter looked at him sharply before returning his gaze to the gloom. He couldn't blame Westley for being uneasy. He felt it too, that worm of unease squirming in his gut. But they'd come this far on promises of fame and fortune, whispered through dusty tones and faded maps. There was no turning back now. "We're almost there," Dexter said gruffly, adjusting his pack higher onto his shoulders. "Just a little ways further." He stepped into the canyon's mouth without looking back to see if Westley followed. The sun dipped lower behind them as they pressed on. Shadows lengthened and merged until everything was bathed in an unsettling, blue-gray twilight. The air grew colder too, dampening their breaths with each exhalation like whispered secrets escaping into the night. Soon, even Dexter had to admit that something felt off about this place. It wasn't just the lack of sunlight. It was as if the very atmosphere was alive with a latent malice, watching them warily from behind veils of darkness. He shook his head sharply, brushing away such thoughts. They were archaeologists, not superstitious fools. But try telling that to his heart pounding against his ribcage, like something desperate trying to escape its cage. They stumbled upon their first obstacle sooner than expected. A sealed cave entrance marked by strange symbols etched deep into stone. Dexter traced them tentatively with gloved fingers while Westley played his flashlight over the markings, muttering under his breath about their peculiarity. They remind me of something," Westley murmured, frowning at the patterns carved into the rock face. "But I can't quite place it." Dexter barely heard him. He was already pushing past the entrance, eager to explore what lay beyond despite the nagging sense of foreboding growing heavier around them. The cave mouth yawned wide enough for two men abreast, but offered little encouragement within its throat. It swallowed their lights greedily, leaving only impenetrable darkness ahead until Westley trained his beam on the ground directly before them. There, they found signs of a recent campsite, abandoned backpacks, half-buried shovels, scattered papers, yet no sign of any human presence. A chill ran down Dexter's spine that had nothing to do with temperature. He knelt beside an upturned notebook filled with hurried sketches, the same disturbing symbols from outside etched repeatedly onto its pages alongside crude drawings of twisted figures writhing in torment. "What is this place?" Westley whispered behind him, voice barely audible over the sudden pounding of blood in Dexter's ears. Dexter didn't answer. He couldn't, not when every fiber of his being screamed at them to turn back now while they still could. But they'd come too far already. turned their backs on reason and safety for this very prize awaiting them within shadows ahead. They pressed deeper into the cave system, guided by Westley's bobbing light and Dexter's dogged determination. The air grew denser here, cloying with an unnatural stillness, broken only by their ragged breaths echoing off unseen walls. Then came whispers. Soft at first, like wind sighing through leaves far above them, but growing louder, more insistent until they echoed off stone surfaces in eerie harmony, words spoken in languages long forgotten, yet somehow familiar too. Westley faltered, flashlight wavering as he froze mid-step. "You hear that too, right?" His voice shook almost violently against the cacophony surrounding them. Dexter nodded numbly. He did more than just hear those whispers. They seemed to claw at his mind, raking across memories long buried beneath layers of guilt and regret. But there was no turning back now. He'd led them down this path willingly, knowingly, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. For better or worse, the darkness had claimed them both. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as they delved deeper into the cave system. They seemed to follow Dexter and Westley, like spectral echoes of their own fears, twisting with each step further from sunlight and sanity. The hairs on the back of Dexter's neck stood tall, his skin prickling under an unseen gaze that felt palpable, yet untraceable. Wesley's flashlight beam bounced off walls slicked with moisture, casting macabre shadows dancing eerily in tune to whispered madness around them. His breath grew ragged, uneven. Dexter could hear the anxious hitches even over his own pounding heart and rushing blood. "You all right?" he asked gruffly, not slowing their pace despite knowing Westley struggled behind him. They needed to keep moving, find what lay ahead before fear rooted them in place forevermore. "I'm fine," Westley lied through gritted teeth, swallowing hard against rising panic. His grip tightened on the flashlight until knuckles turned white. Its beam flickered wildly before steadying once more under his trembling hand. Suddenly, Dexter froze mid-step. Ahead loomed a monstrous sight, an enormous stalagmite stretching up towards unseen ceiling like a grotesque frozen waterfall. Except it wasn't stone that formed this column, but bone. He approached cautiously, fingers brushing against cool hardness marred by deep gouges. They were too regular, too deliberate to be mere imperfections of nature. "Stay back," Dexter warned without turning around. His stomach churned with unease as he traced those familiar symbols etched deeply into the macabre monument. These weren't just scratches made in passing. Each mark bore evidence of intense labor, frenzied desperation carved by someone or something determined to leave a message behind. Westley hesitated before moving closer despite Dexter's warning. "What do you think this means?" His voice wavered as he reached out tentatively towards the symbol-laden surface, only to snatch his hand back at the last moment, repulsed by an inexplicable dread. Dexter shrugged helplessly. "I don't know." And that admission scared him more than anything else thus far. Not knowing was dangerous here, where ignorance could easily become their undoing. But he kept such thoughts buried beneath layers of determination and denial. They had come this far on promises whispered through faded maps and dusty tomes. Turning back now seemed tantamount to admitting defeat. They pressed onward, guided by Westley's bobbing light and Dexter's grim resolve. The cave system opened up into a vast cavern, its ceiling soaring high above them like an inverted cathedral dripping with stalactites resembling fangs ready to snap downwards at any moment. At its center stood another peculiar sight, a massive stone table carved from single slab of bedrock, upon which lay scattered artifacts unlike anything Dexter had ever encountered. Ornaments wrought from dark metals twisted into nightmarish forms, jewelry adorned with gemstones that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light cast by Wesley's trembling beam. And at its heart, a book bound in rotting leather, pages yellowed with age yet remarkably intact despite being left exposed for who knows how long. As Dexter reached out towards the tome, Westley suddenly gasped behind him. "Look, He aimed his flashlight away from their treasure trove towards something else hidden within shadows farther afield. Shapes huddled together, barely discernible amidst gloom but unmistakable nonetheless. Bodies. Dexter approached cautiously, each step echoing ominously around them now that whispers had quietened into near silence. As they drew closer, the macabre scene came into clearer view under Westley's shaking light. 6 figures seated in neat circle, facing inward, legs crossed beneath them like lotus flowers blossoming from some fetid earth. They wore robes identical to those adorning statues found earlier outside cavern entrance, heads inclined slightly forward, as if deep in thought or prayer. Or perhaps not entirely of their own volition. Because upon closer inspection, Dexter noticed something else disturbing. Each figure was secured by heavy chains anchored into stone beneath them, holding them captive against will, despite having no visible restraints binding wrists or ankles. And worse still, those weren't faces they bowed over, but gaping maws filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth, glinting menacingly even in dim light. Westley retched loudly beside him, doubling over before spitting foul-tasting bile onto cave floor. Dexter shot him an impatient glare, despite knowing full well how horrific their discovery truly was. Fear threatened to overtake them both here, amidst madness personified yet moving forward, remained imperative lest they become another statuary horror themselves. "You all right?" he asked roughly again, receiving only nod this time around. Together, they turned away from nightmarish tableau towards safer ground, closer to where Book awaited. Praying silently, none of those monstrous things stirred behind them now that backs were turned. As if on cue, however, one of the seated figures moved. Just a fraction at first, barely perceptible had Westley not swung flashlight back round just then, catching glimpse out corner eye. But there it was again. Another infinitesimal shift followed immediately by third, more pronounced still. Now all 6 creatures seemed to lean ever so slightly towards them, like predators scenting prey nearby. Dexter froze, heart pounding wildly against ribs as he locked gazes with whatever lay behind those twisted features. For a moment, time held its breath along with him, then abruptly shattered into chaos. 6 sets of glowing red eyes snapped open simultaneously, fixating upon intruders violating their silent vigil within darkness eternal. And though no sound issued forth from deep throats of these abominations, Dexter swore he heard cacophony echoing through cave system nonetheless. Cacophony born not merely of voices but thoughts themselves clamoring desperately for release after millennia spent imprisoned beneath Earth's crust. Westley screamed first before fleeing madly back towards entranceway, flashlight beam bouncing erratically off walls illuminating his terrified flight, as if dance macabre performed solely for benefit of unseen horrors pursuing him relentlessly. Dexter stood rooted momentarily longer, yet ultimately gave chase too once shock wore off, leaving behind only echoes of terror mingling with whispers, resumed full force now, baying like hungry hounds eager to devour lingering scent of fear left behind. They ran through winding tunnels hewn from living rock by hands unknown, breath ragged and lungs burning under strain, exerted by desperate pursuit. Yet each step seemed taken against resistance growing stronger by second. Air grew heavier around them until moving felt akin swimming against powerful currents threatening to drag them under altogether. Suddenly Westley cried out again up ahead somewhere. Cry cut short abruptly midstream, replaced instead by ghastly wet crunch echoing through chamber like thunderclap, striking eardrums directly. Dexter stumbled halt, body racked with sudden agony at thought of friend's fate, now sealed forevermore amidst unending nightmares, awaiting within such forsaken place. But there was no turning back either way. He had led them down this path willingly, knowingly. Whatever happened henceforth laid squarely upon his shoulders alone, to bear responsibility for. With grim resolve renewed, Dexter pushed forward once more into darkness looming ahead, guided solely now by memory etched indelibly onto mind's eye during initial descent. Left here then right there before veering sharply downwards into what hoped would prove true exit path, back out into world bathe, mercifully still under sunlight's gentle caress. Yet even as hope dared flicker briefly within breast pocket of his jacket where lay a crumpled map once used to navigate themselves thus far, cold reality pressed inexorably onwards, heavier than ever before. No matter how many twists and turns they took attempting escape now, no path led them anywhere, but deeper still into bowels of this accursed no path. Canyon. Until finally came moment when realization struck him utterly unmistakable amidst surrounding gloom. There was no way out. In the throes of desperation, Dexter stumbled against the canyon wall, his hands sinking into something slick and cold. He yanked it back with a muffled curse, rubbing his palm on his trousers as he turned to shine his flashlight onto the spot. The beam illuminated a dark, viscous substance glistening like oil, but smelling more like decay. It trickled down the rock face in rivulets that seemed almost alive. "Westley?" Dexter called out softly, not wanting to draw attention, but needing assurance nonetheless. There was no answer, except for the distant echo of his own voice, dying away into silence once more. He strained his ears, listening hard enough to feel it reverberate through every bone in his body until he thought he heard something else, a faint scratching sound from deeper within the canyon. He swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat and pushed off from the wall, following that ominous noise further into the gloom. As he ventured deeper still, the air grew heavier with an acrid scent reminiscent of charred meat mixed with something sour like spoiled milk. It clung to him, coating tongue and teeth until he could taste fear's bitter tang at the back of his mouth. The canyon walls pressed closer now too, no longer mere shadows looming overhead but palpable presences crowding around, boxing him in on all sides save for the narrow path ahead leading God knows where. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if some unseen force bore down upon him with ever-increasing pressure. Yet despite his growing unease, Dexter pressed onward, drawn towards that insidious scratching sound by some morbid fascination he couldn't quite explain nor resist. Soon enough, however, it became apparent why such a sinister noise should resonate so strongly amidst these desolate surroundings. Before him stood an enormous cavern mouth gaping wide open like jaws ready to devour anything foolish enough approached too close. From within emerged those terrible scratches, now accompanied by wet tearing noises, interspersed with sickening crunches, echoing outwards from its Stygian depth. Dexter played his flashlight beam across the entrance, revealing walls slicked over in more of that same strange viscous substance he'd first encountered earlier. It glistened under light's harsh glare, despite being streaked thickly here and there with something darker still. Clumps of what appeared once upon a time flesh, but now resembled nothing so much as raw meat left out too long under summer sun. A chill ran down Dexter's spine, seeing such evidence laid bare before him, knowing full well none could have gotten there, naturally given no living creature dared venture near this forsaken place. No, whatever monstrosity dwelled within those foul caverns had made sure every last scrap remained preserved perfectly intact amidst darkness' eternal embrace. Yet even as revulsion churned within stomach by a rising up throat threatening to spill forth onto ground below, curiosity gnawed at him too, that same damnable itch driving men mad throughout history, compelled now by some inner demon daring him whisper promises of knowledge forbidden held fast inside those shadowy recesses. He felt drawn inexorably towards uncovering truth hidden here, lest he never knowing how much closer he'd stood once to understanding world's greatest mysteries. But first, find Westley. With grim determination renewed once more, Dexter took a deep breath, steeling himself against both revulsion and fear coursing through veins like wildfire. Then stepping carefully around those treacherous-looking remnants littering cavern floor, he crossed threshold, entering hell itself where truth awaited amidst nightmares unfurling ever more darkly. The moment Dexter set foot inside the cavern, the atmosphere changed drastically. The air grew even heavier if possible, pressing down upon him like a physical weight threatening to crush his chest until each breath became laborious struggle against invisible force field. Yet despite stifling heat, permeating every inch of skin, exposed directly beneath layers clothing, protecting fragile flesh from whatever horrors lurked unseen within nearby shadows. Cast long across uneven ground, strewn hazards aplenty. His flashlight swept back and forth, revealing glimpses of those same unnerving walls, coated thickly now with writhing tendrils that seemed almost alive themselves, thrashing outwards as if trying to reach him somehow despite being rooted firm where they adhered. Those sickening, wet, tearing sounds grew louder here too, accompanied now by low growls rumbling deep inside throat belonging to creature unseen but palpable nonetheless through very air vibrating around them heavy with malice intent. Dexter hesitated, uncertain whether proceed further or turn tail back outwards immediately before situation worsened worse, yet could still happen given present circumstances. But then memory flashed starkly vivid across mind's eye, Westley crying out earlier amidst desperate flight through twisting tunnels only to fall silent, abruptly midstream, replaced ghastly wet crunch echoing forevermore hauntingly through empty corridors, despairing solitude. No matter what horrors awaited deeper inside, he couldn't abandon his friend without first attempting locate him somehow. So summoning courage-born desperation mixed hope against hope's dying breath, Dexter plunged onward into darkness looming ahead, until finally beam landed upon something besides more of those ominous walls, a heap piled high among shadow's embrace. Approaching cautiously, lest disturb whatever might lie hidden beneath such obscuring mounds, he reached out tentative hand, seeking confirmation fears were unfounded after all. Merely piled discarded debris left behind careless adventurers passing through prior perhaps. Yet fingers brushing against surface encountered neither stone nor wood but cloth instead, rough textured fabric worn smooth by years' use, and familiar too. Dexter's heart lurched violently within chest cavity as memories came flooding back uninvited. Westley clutching tightly that same old jacket he wore even now, despite being threadbare patches aplenty scattered across front where once proud buttons had fallen off long ago. His assistant loved it dearly, claiming held lucky powers keeping him safe against all manner evils, lurking world unseen. But there was nothing fortunate nor protective about how it appeared before them now. A crumpled mass thrown haphazardly atop another mound comprised mostly rotting flesh. What remained of Westley after he'd been devoured. A wave of nausea swept over Dexter then, bile rising swift burning throat until he choked back gag reflex, threatening erupt violent spasm-racking body with tremors. He stumbled backwards several steps away from gruesome sight before him eyes, unable bear witness any longer such appalling violation human life taken so callously amidst these God-forsaken lands. Yet even amidst revulsion churning within stomach, bile rising up throat, threatening spill forth onto ground below once more, reality sank deep down into very marrow bones. Westley was gone. Lost forevermore amidst canyons unending nightmares awaiting within shadowy depths forever, now claimed prize belonging some nameless monstrosity, prowling these forsaken places, hunting prey foolish enough venture near. No, not just any creature, but something far worse than mere beast prowling wild seeking sustenance alone. Whatever dwelled here possessed intelligence beyond animal cunning capable planning, luring, trapping unsuspecting victims into traps set carefully beforehand, then watching gleefully whilst they struggled helplessly against inevitable fate sealed long ago already. Dexter knew, because he'd felt it too, that same dark intelligence reaching out tendrils cold, calculating malice brushing gently against consciousness, earlier when first encountered those strange viscous walls, now coating cavern floor thickly. It wanted him still, drawing closer, ever more intimate invitation, extended solely towards its desired target. Himself. With Westley lost forever amidst horrors unfolding around them both, Dexter realized there remained only one path left to tread, if hope existed anywhere whatsoever, escape unholy grasp, encircling ever tighter. Follow this malevolent force leading directly back into heart. Darkness, whence born, thus confront source head-on, rather than cower away fearful. Shadows cast long across uneven ground, strewn hazards aplenty. So, I'm now understanding nature adversary faced. Dexter took deep breaths, steeling himself once more against fear, coursing wildly through veins, like wildfire burning out control entirely. Then, turning resolutely towards cavern depths, hidden still deeper, amidst surrounding gloom, wherein lay truth, awaiting, amidst nightmares unfurling evermore, darkly did he venture forth unaided, save sole weapon faith, held close heart daring challenge fate itself. But first, reclaim Westley's body if possible. Give friend proper burial, rites, earned respect, despite terrible end befell him here amongst forsaken lands. And perhaps a long way find answers too? Why? Dexter's footsteps echoed like distant thunder as he ventured deeper into the cavern, each step heavier than the last. The air grew colder still, and an unnatural silence pressed against his ears, amplifying his ragged breathing. His flashlight beam barely pierced the gloom ahead before being swallowed by shadows once more. The walls here were no longer smooth. They writhed with movement, undulating like snakeskin beneath Dexter's horrified gaze. He reached out tentatively to touch one, recoiling at its cold, slick texture. It felt almost organic. A shudder racked his body as he realized that these weren't just cave walls anymore. They were part of something alive. A faint glow caught his eye farther ahead, where the passage opened into a large chamber. As he approached cautiously, the light flickered and danced menacingly across the uneven surfaces surrounding him. When Dexter stepped into the open space, his breath caught in his throat. Before him stood a grotesque spectacle. Westley's body twisted unnaturally upon itself, suspended from the ceiling by viscous strands that pulsed rhythmically with life. His eyes were wide open and staring directly at Dexter, filled not with terror, but accusation. Worse still was the sight of Dexter's own silhouette, carved into the cavern floor beneath his friend's corpse, illuminated by an eerie blue glow emanating from somewhere unseen. "Westley," Dexter whispered hoarsely, stepping closer despite himself. As he moved nearer, those accusing eyes seemed to follow him, burning into his soul like branding irons. The creature feeding on their fears had twisted Westley beyond recognition, turning him into a grotesque mimicry of itself, and now it wanted Dexter too. A low growl echoed through the chamber, resonating deep within Dexter's chest. It felt almost familiar. Then realization struck. That was his voice. His body was already beginning to contort, muscles spasming uncontrollably as he struggled against unseen forces pulling him apart at molecular level. Panic surged through him like wildfire. He couldn't let himself become another pawn in this malevolent game. With every ounce of willpower left within him, Dexter fought back against those insidious tendrils, snaking into his mind, pushing them away forcefully until he regained control over own body once more. But there was no hiding from truth laid bare before him now. Whatever dwelled here could manipulate not just physical forms but mental landscapes too. And if it had transformed Westley so utterly, what horrors awaited Dexter himself? A sudden chill ran down his spine, raising hackles on his neck despite oppressive heat surrounding him. He wasn't alone in this chamber after all. Something else lurked nearby, watching silently from shadows cast by sickly blue light emanating from beneath him. Dexter scanned the darkness warily, heart pounding wildly against ribs like drum beats, signaling imminent danger. His eyes fell upon movement further back, a large shape moving slowly but deliberately towards him, blocking off any means of retreat, besides confronting whatever monstrosity awaited there. As it emerged into view, Dexter gasped aloud despite efforts to remain silent. Before him loomed a twisted mockery of himself. Same face, same build, even wearing replica clothing, except everything was coated viscous, slime, pulsating with life. And those eyes. They burned with the same malevolent intelligence he'd felt earlier, only amplified tenfold now. This abomination had been crafted entirely from Dexter's deepest fears and regrets, fashioned into something tangible to hunt him down like prey. It crept closer, jaws opening wide, revealing row upon row serrated teeth, dripping ichorous drool onto cavern floor beneath. There was nowhere left to run anymore. No safe haven remained untouched by terror stalking these forsaken lands. But neither would Dexter go down without fight. With a defiant roar, he charged headlong towards his doppelganger, intent on tearing it apart limb from limb before allowing itself claim another victim tonight. Dexter crashed into his doppelganger with primal fury, fists slamming against the viscous surface that gave way like rotting flesh beneath his blows. The creature's howl echoed off cavern walls as it staggered back from impact, giving Dexter momentary satisfaction before pain exploded through his right shoulder. One of its acidic spittle droplets had found mark, burning deep into muscle tissue. He ignored agony, fueled by rage and desperation instead. This abomination wore Westley's face now too, a grotesque parody of the man who'd once looked up to Dexter with such admiration, now twisted beyond recognition under cryptid's influence. Guilt surged through him alongside pain, but didn't slow his assault. They grappled amidst choking miasma of fear and despair. Each time Dexter landed hit on his counterpart's face, Westley's agonized cries rang out hauntingly real, despite knowing none originated from actual throat anymore. Yet each cry weakened creature too, its hold loosened slightly whenever struck directly upon visage. But victory proved elusive because every advantage gained brought fresh wound, inflicted by serrated claws tearing into Dexter's flesh or acidic drool eating through clothing, leaving raw welts behind. His strength waned with blood loss, while entity seemed unflagging despite injuries sustained. Worse still was realization creeping in around edges of battle frenzy. This thing wouldn't stay defeated once incapacitated. It would merely regroup elsewhere deeper within canyon depths, ready to renew attack stronger than ever before. There'd be no end until one of them lay dead at others' feet forevermore. Dexter stumbled backwards after taking particularly vicious swipe across chest. Breath came ragged now, punctuated by harsh gasps of air through clenched teeth against throbbing wounds. He knew he couldn't keep fighting like this much longer without succumbing to injuries himself first. As if sensing his waning resolve, cryptid pressed advantage with renewed vigor, driving him further back towards cavern wall until pinned against rough surface. No escape remained, except pushing past fear and facing terror head-on. Yet, even as those thoughts raced through mind, another truth dawned. He couldn't fight monster's physical form alone, had to tackle mental construct underlying its power too. With desperate finality, Dexter reached into pocket, pulling forth crumpled photograph tucked away long ago, amidst memories best left undisturbed. Image of his late grandfather smiling warmly during happier times. Man who'd once been proud explorer himself before settling down, raising family, instead chasing ghosts scattered across wilds alone. Grandfather had always believed there existed more to life than mere accumulation, wealth, or glory. Wisdom reflected in twinkle eye whenever stories were shared, late into night between them over cups tea, steaming gently beside fireplace embers, glowing lowly nearby. Now gripping faded photograph tightly within trembling grasp, Dexter felt those lessons echoing through generations like beacon guiding lost souls homeward. He closed eyes briefly, drawing strength from memory, then opened them again, resolute determination burning anew within gaze, now staring directly into Doppelganger's malevolent glare without flinching. No longer would he cower before shadows cast by fears dwelling deep inside himself. Instead, stand defiant against them, armed only with truth of self-knowledge and unyielding will to break free from bonds forged in darkness long ago. With newfound purpose surging through veins, Dexter lunged forward despite pain-racking body, slamming fist directly into Monster's face once more. But this time wasn't like previous clashes. Something changed mid-strike. Face beneath his knuckles morphed back momentarily into familiar features of Westley, staring up at him with pleading eyes before dissolving once more into grotesque parody. And then, silence. Entire caverns seemed to hold collective breath as everyone waited expectantly for inevitable outcome. Neither man desired, but both knew must eventually arrive here, amidst stony jaws of Sunless Canyon, swallowing all light and hope together. Dexter stood tall, chest heaving with exertion and adrenaline, surging through him while staring down Doppelganger, now frozen solid at his feet. He'd done it. Broken entities hold over self-loathing demons plaguing minds since boyhood days filled with disappointment after disappointing those around him. But elation proved short-lived when reality sank in once more. Westley remained trapped somewhere within this monstrosity, waiting anxiously for release from thrall, binding him tighter than any physical restraints ever could. And until freed completely, danger posed by cryptid lingered still very much alive. "Westley," Dexter whispered hoarsely, falling to knees beside fallen form. Leaning in close, he searched depths of those hateful eyes, desperately seeking any spark of familiarity, remaining amidst emptiness consuming soul whole. Nothing responded except cold malevolence, staring blankly back. Yet beneath layers revulsion and dread, something else lurked too. Faintest flicker emotion, reminiscent earlier Westley's admiration for Dexter, now twisted into awful pity instead, as if knowing what awaited him, should he ever find strength breaking free once more from this nightmare prison. Dexter reached out tentatively towards creature's face, fingers brushing against smooth stone surface no longer viscous but hard as marble. He hesitated briefly before pressing palm firmly onto cold, unyielding surface beneath, closing eyes tightly to center himself internally, while reaching outward, mentally seeking connection lost between them both once upon time, now seemed lifetime ago. At first, nothing happened, save dull ache, spreading up arm from exertion earlier sustained during brutal combat. Then, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, but growing steadily more insistent until impossible to ignore any longer, faint sense warmth began radiating through him, directly proportional to intensity focus exerted upon entity before him. Slowly, ever so slowly, cavern walls surrounding them seemed lose definition edges, softening further into gloom, until finally all distinction vanished entirely, leaving nothing except vast expanse emptiness, pressing inwards from every direction imaginable, yet somehow also containing entire world with it. Only. When Dexter opened eyes again, he found himself standing alone, amidst void, without trace either doppelganger or cavern floor having once existed at all. Instead, everything was bathed soft luminescence emanating from above where no sun shone, nor stars twinkled, merely presence, pure consciousness, embodied within light, itself guiding him gently forward, step by step along path now laid bare before him, leading directly towards. Innumerable possibilities stretched out ahead, endless as night stretching far beyond horizon line visible during twilight hours. Each promised new discoveries waiting eagerly to be revealed should he dare venture closer, investigating further along wayward journey begun so long ago amidst shadows cast by Sunless Canyon. But none mattered now, because only one path remained true, the road less traveled than any other imaginable. Returning home not physically but spiritually first, tending wounds inflicted upon self both literally and metaphorically until fully healed whole once more. Then perhaps might find strength forgiving past sins committed against those who loved him dearly, even when undeserving such compassion. And so, with renewed purpose, burning brightly within his heart, now untethered from anchors holding it captive before, Dexter Wellwood turned away from emptiness surrounding him, instead embracing warmth radiating inwardly outward like beacon guiding lost soul. The canyon walls had closed like jaws around them, crushing their hope of escape as surely as if physical hands gripped their throats. Dexter and Westley stood at the mouth of a cave, its entrance an abyssal maw gaping before them. The air tasted sour here, heavy with decay, and something else. Desperation. Dexter's flashlight flickered weakly against the Stygian dark, painting fleeting glimpses of shadows that seemed to writhe in defiance of any logical form or movement. His heart hammered wildly, but he forced himself to breathe deeply through his nose, pushing down panic that threatened to boil over. Westley stumbled beside him, gasping for breath despite their standstill. His earlier claustrophobia had grown into full-blown hysteria, eyes wide and wild, as if staring directly at his own personal nightmare made manifest in the gloom around them. "Dexter!" He choked out between gasps of air, clawing desperately at Dexter's arm. "We can't. We shouldn't go any further." Dexter glanced down at Wesley's hand, clutched like a vice around his forearm before giving it a firm squeeze, meant to reassure rather than dislodge. He looked back into the cave, steeling himself against what awaited within those Stygian depths. "We have no choice," he said sternly, but gently, prying Wesley's fingers loose one by one until only theirs stood between them again. "We'll find our way out once we've found what we came for." Westley whimpered softly at the mention of their quest, rubbing his wrists where Dexter's grip had been like trying to erase some invisible mark etched onto his skin. He nodded nonetheless, letting go of his fear long enough to follow Dexter into the yawning chasm. The cave swallowed them whole without a sound, save for the echoing footfalls of their boots against slick stone floors beneath. The further they ventured inside, the more it felt as though they walked not on earth, but underwater amidst some sunken graveyard, where every step dislodged spectral silt to swirl around them in silent accusation. Wesley's earlier bravado had crumbled entirely now, replaced instead by a childlike terror that made him stick close to Dexter's side, while casting fearful glances over his shoulder, as if expecting something sinister to leap forth from the shadows at any moment. Dexter, meanwhile, felt something stirring within himself too. Not fear exactly, but rather unease born of uncertainty mixed with anticipation. He couldn't explain it even had he wanted to. All he knew was that whatever lay ahead, their path led there unerringly. The cave twisted sharply, then plunged downward into what could only be described as an underground cavern, so vast its far walls vanished behind utter blackness, utterly impenetrable by light alone. Here too stood something else entirely, a colossal stalactite or column hanging down like some frozen waterfall turned to stone, except this was no mere geological formation, but rather the unmistakable silhouette of, yes, there could be no mistaking it now, man-made monument shaped into a towering effigy carved from darkness itself. They approached cautiously, eyes wide with awe and dread intertwined. Up close, the statue proved even more magnificent, or horrific depending upon perspective held regarding such things carved by hands other than divine ones. Carved into its base were words etched deep enough to seem like chasms themselves, swallowing light swallowed within their depths forevermore. "Here lies the treasure of kings buried with those who lay claim to it." A chill ran down Dexter's spine despite heat radiating off statue before him. This was what they'd come seeking after all, wasn't it? The prize worth risking life and limb over. Yet now faced with reality of such prize, found amid surroundings far removed from anything remotely resembling safety or sanity, uncertainty gnawed at him harder than ever before. He glanced sideways at Westley, who seemed no better off himself, pale-faced, trembling hands clutched tightly around flashlight, aimed straight ahead yet revealing nothing beyond darkness itself. "Well?" Wesley's voice cracked like dried leaves rustling in autumn breeze. Dexter hesitated only a moment longer before replying gruffly. "We came this far, might as well see it through now." He reached out tentatively towards treasure, said to lie buried within statue's embrace. But just as fingers brushed against cold stone's surface, sudden noise echoed all around them, a low rumble resonating through cavern walls, like distant thunder announcing imminent storm. They froze in place, breath held captive inside lungs too terrified even exhale lest draw attention towards themselves again. When sound finally ceased abruptly altogether, Westley dared whisper question nobody wanted answered aloud. "What do we do now?" Dexter swallowed hard against lump forming in throat before answering quietly, yet resolutely, "We find our way out." And turning away from treasure neither desired nor deserved any more, led them back along path they'd entered mere shadows ago, but had become something far more sinister during journey thus far. Dexter Wellwood stood at the mouth of an abyss, the sun-kissed world behind him, fading fast as he peered into the encroaching darkness. The canyon yawned before him like a monster ready to swallow its prey whole. Its walls were slick and black, seemingly infinite in their descent into shadows. A cold sweat trickled down his spine despite the heat lingering from the day's waning hours. Westley Castle clutched at Dexter's elbow, fingers digging through cloth until they met skin. "We should go back," he whispered hoarsely, eyes darting nervously between Dexter and the ominous chasm. His flashlight beam flickered anxiously across the yawning entrance, illuminating fleeting glimpses of jagged rocks and twisted trees. Dexter freed Wesley's hand off his arm gently but firmly. "No," he said quietly, yet resolutely. "We've come this far for a reason." He squared his shoulders, stepping forward into the canyon, without waiting for agreement or protest from his companion. The air grew heavier with each step they took deeper into the ravine. It felt alive somehow, oppressive and hostile, pushing against them as if trying to shove intruders back out again. The weight bore down on Dexter's chest, like a physical force. He could almost hear it growling low in its throat at their audacity. A sudden gust of wind blew through the canyon, howling mournfully around them before dying abruptly at their feet. Westley stumbled backward with a frightened gasp, flashlight trembling wildly in his grasp, until Dexter caught him by the arm once more. "It's just the wind," Dexter murmured calmly despite his own racing heart. But even as he spoke those reassuring words, he knew better than to believe them himself. This place was wrong, unnatural. It didn't belong on Earth alongside ordinary winds and harmless creatures of the night. No, something else dwelled here, something ancient and malevolent. The canyon walls closed around them tighter now, looming ever higher overhead until they seemed like towering cliffs reaching for one another across the void between them. A sickening sense of claustrophobia washed over Dexter. He fought against rising panic, forcing himself to breathe evenly despite constricting lungs and pounding pulse. They ventured further still, guided solely by Wesley's flickering flashlight beam, which danced erratically off rock faces only to vanish into more darkness once again. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though they waded through unseen waters threatening to drag them under at any moment now. Suddenly, Westley stumbled over something half buried beneath gritty soil and loose stones. His footing gave way completely, sending him crashing down onto hands and knees with a cry of pain that echoed loudly off canyon walls before fading into silence once more. Dexter hurried to his side, dropping down beside him without regard for own balance or safety now. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently, one hand reaching out instinctively towards Wesley's arm, while the other swept their meager circle of light around them anxiously. Westley scrambled back onto his feet unsteadily, brushing off dirt from palms and knees even as he leaned heavily against Dexter for support. His face was pale, save for 2 spots of color burning high on cheekbones, like embers left untended too long within fire grate. "I'm fine," Westley insisted through gritted teeth, though his voice betrayed him by wavering slightly at edges before trailing off altogether into silence once more. Dexter frowned up at him sharply, but offered no further argument. Instead, he simply nodded tightly and turned away again towards their goal ahead. They pressed onward together now, closer than ever due to Wesley's limp, each limping step bringing them deeper yet still not quite deep enough apparently. Ahead loomed a bend in the canyon path unlike any other they'd encountered so far. Here it was almost like passage closed entirely off by massive boulder wedged tightly within gap between wall on one side and sheer drop-off on opposite end. Only narrow crevice remained wide enough for single person maybe, but certainly not both men together. Westley hesitated at threshold, flashlight beam wavering uncertainly across obstruction before him. He licked dry lips nervously before speaking up at last. "We shouldn't separate," he said quietly yet firmly, despite quaver underlying tone. Dexter looked back over his shoulder sharply once more, but saw determination rather than fear reflected in Wesley's eyes now. Good. They needed that here. Courage wouldn't save them from what lay ahead necessarily, but it might just keep dread at bay long enough to reach end objective alive still. Dexter's heart pounded like a drum echoing through the canyon as they stumbled upon another campsite, this one more recent than the others. The remnants of a fire smoldered weakly amid scattered supplies, a cookpot overturned beside a half-eaten ration tin, a faded map crumpled near a lantern that still held enough fuel to cast feeble shadows against encroaching darkness. Wesley's breath caught in his throat as he swept the flashlight across the scene. This can't be. They were just here. His voice trembled around them like a spectral whisper, carried away on cold wind snaking up from depths below. Dexter picked a map, tracing the route with gloved fingers until they stopped at a familiar marking deep within the canyon's labyrinth. The final descent into shadows, before uncharted territory, swallowed everything whole. They made it this far, he murmured, unease coiling in his gut like a snake ready to strike. Westley grabbed Dexter's arm suddenly, pointing towards something half buried under debris near fire pit. A glint of metal caught flashlight beam as they moved closer. An old pocket watch, its case tarnished but still bearing etched initials, WC. "That belongs to Gregson," Westley breathed hoarsely. Dexter knelt down, brushing dirt off watch face to reveal cracked glass beneath his fingertips. Time had stopped here long ago, frozen at precisely 3:14 p.m. He swallowed hard against growing dread within him. It felt as if they were being watched again, but this time the gaze was more focused. Hungrier. As if on cue, Wesley's flashlight flickered briefly before dying completely in his hands with a defeated click. Panic surged through them both like wildfire as sudden darkness swallowed their meager circle of light utterly. They stumbled over each other, desperation fueling clumsy movements while trying to find any remaining supplies. Dexter felt around blindly until he found Wesley's backpack, unzipping it frantically in search of extra batteries they'd packed earlier. His fingers closed around familiar cylindrical shape just as something moved nearby. A soft scuffling sound against rock followed by silence once more. He froze mid-reach, every sense heightened to impossible degrees, yet still failing miserably at detecting whatever lurked unseen mere feet away now. Beside him, Westley whimpered softly, curling inwards upon himself like wounded animal trying desperately to make itself smaller, less noticeable perhaps. Then came whisper, a barely audible rasp of sound that seemed to emanate from every direction simultaneously. "Help me!" It pleaded urgently yet held unmistakable edge of malice too, as if pleading for aid whilst mocking their futile efforts simultaneously. They remained rooted in place, hardly daring even breathe let alone speak aloud, now lest draw attention further towards themselves. But then again, what choice did they truly have here? Either risk attempting escape back along path taken or stay put awaiting inevitable fate looming ever closer. Dexter chose motion. Better to face unknown horrors head-on than cower like prey awaiting slaughterhouse. He found batteries finally, clicking them into flashlight until beam cast trembling circle against encroaching darkness once more before him. Westley clung onto Dexter's arm as they moved cautiously away from campsite now, each step heavier than last due to weight of dread pressing down upon shoulders alongside physical weariness beginning set in already. Still, progress was made slowly yet steadily until reaching bend leading deeper into canyon mouth. There, carved into wall beside narrow passage, lay words etched deeply into stone itself, trapped by time. Beneath them hung another inscription seemingly newer judging from lack of weathering, despite being barely legible beneath grime, accumulated over ages. As will ye be. Dexter reached out tentatively towards those chilling letters, tracing their outlines carefully while mind raced, trying to piece together fractured puzzle pieces strewn about thus far. Who wrote these? How long ago? And most importantly, what did they mean? Suddenly, Westley pulled Dexter backwards sharply, just as something snaked around wrist of his extended hand. Cold metal clicked shut around bone before he could react or even comprehend what had happened precisely. They both looked down in horror at Shackle now securing them together, rusted chain clinking against stone floor menacingly. In that moment, beam from flashlight shifted upwards along wall to fall upon face of one who'd spoken earlier, a figure barely discernible amidst shadows cast by their own light until now. It seemed man once, but decay had claimed him long ago. Skin stretched taut over skull like parchment, covering some ancient tome too fragile to touch, yet impossible to resist, turning pages nonetheless. Eyes within sockets glowed eerily as if still alive somehow despite rest of body being naught, but mummified husk left behind by whatever force held sway here deep beneath Earth's surface. Those eyes regarded them steadily now. Hunger, evident plainly despite lack of flesh covering jaws no longer capable grinding teeth anymore. Westley whimpered again, shrinking away from sight yet remaining close due to unbreakable bond forged between them recently via Shackle. Dexter stood tall instead, defiance flaring up within him unexpectedly strong enough to momentarily banish fear lurking beneath surface. "No," he growled lowly at figure before them. "You won't have us too." Then louder, "We won't let you." Silence held for eternity, stretched thin across taut seconds, ticking by steadily despite no clock present anywhere nearby, here in this timeless realm suspended between life and death. Then finally, laughter echoed through canyon, bouncing off walls to surround them completely on all sides. It was not laughter born of joy or mirth, but rather mirthless cackle, devoid any trace warmth whatsoever. Cold sneer mocking their futile resistance, offered merely lip service. As it rang out around them, something stirred within depths below. A shifting rumble akin boulders breaking apart slowly yet inexorably. Westley clung tighter to Dexter now, trembling violently even as he begged softly, "Let's go, please." Yet neither could move. Chain holding them together stretched taut between bodies whilst wall behind began crumbling away, stone by stone, revealing gaping maw yawning ever wider mere inches from backs. They were trapped. No escape remained except perhaps through miracle, which they already proven scarce commodity thus far amidst shadows clinging tightly to every crevice here, like malignant growth threatening consume all light forevermore. Dexter closed eyes briefly, steeling himself against terror, attempting to seize control once more before rallying spirit within him once more. When he opened them again, resolve burned fierce and unwavering. They would not succumb so easily. Fight until last breath remained. Then, perhaps beyond too if possible. Because now he understood fully what lay ahead. This was no mere threat of death alone, but something far worse. Eternal entombment within canyon walls themselves, doomed to languish here alongside other lost souls forevermore. Condemned by own greed and hubris, seeking treasures best left undisturbed beneath Earth's surface. And yet, even knowing such fate awaited them still, Dexter refused to yield completely. For there was power too hidden deep within heart of man. Defiance capable of facing down monsters, born pure darkness itself. So long as spark remained alight, could hope burn bright enough to drive shadows away temporarily perhaps? Thus, with renewed determination gripping him tightly like armor-forged fires themselves, Dexter reached out towards Shackle, binding them together, reaching for any means possible, freeing themselves from grip of Sunless Canyon, once and for all, even if price demanded be their very own souls. Dexter stood rooted, his breath misting before him as he faced down the grotesque parody of Westley Castle. The entity had consumed every inch of his assistant's body, twisting it into a mockery that dripped shadows and whispered echoes of Westley's fears back at them. Its eyes burned like twin furnaces, promising a fate worse than death if Dexter failed to confront the truth within himself. "You're not him," Dexter growled, but there was no conviction behind his words. He knew what he saw, what he felt. The cold tendrils of dread snaking up his spine were all too real. This was Westley, or at least a twisted facsimile, spawned from their shared desperation and fear. "Let him go," Dexter commanded, his voice echoing through the canyon like thunder. But even as he spoke, he knew there would be no release for either of them until they faced this thing together. It was a test. It always had been. Wesley's mockery laughed, a sound like rocks grinding against one another deep underground. "He doesn't want to go," it said, its voice an unsettling chorus of Wesley's past and present. "He wants what you have, redemption." Dexter's grip tightened on his grandfather's pocket watch, the only artifact he hadn't thrown back into darkness. Its ticking filled him with resolve as memories flooded his mind. His mentor's disapproving gaze when Dexter turned down a chance to help search for a missing expedition party. Westley's anxious eyes pleading with him to reconsider their quest into uncharted territory. "No," Dexter whispered, shaking away the ghosts of decisions past. "I won't let this thing use our fears against us." With newfound determination surging through his veins, Dexter stepped forward until he stood nose to shadow with Wesley's doppelganger. The air crackled between them like static electricity waiting for release. "You want my guilt?" Dexter challenged, each word carved from ice and fire. "You'll have it along with mine." And then, before the creature could react, Dexter plunged his free hand into its chest, not meeting resistance but sinking deep as though grasping at emptiness itself. The entity screamed, a sound that threatened to shatter eardrums and sanity alike. Yet beneath the cacophony lay something else, recognition. For this was no mere battle of will or strength. It was confrontation between two halves of one wounded soul, seeking salvation through self-destruction. Dexter felt it then, the cold embrace of his own demons clutching him tight, dragging him down into darkness where he'd long since banished them to languish unseen. But there too waited Wesley's despair, entangled with Dexter's shame, like weeds grown wild together over time forgotten. They struggled there in shadows cast by their entwined psyches, man against monster born within himself, friend wrestling foe conjured from shared torment, and all around them canyon walls seemed to close in further still until only tiny sliver of starlit sky remained visible far above. Then came moment when, with one final cry torn raw from throat itself, Westley's creature unleashed its grip on both men simultaneously. They stumbled apart, gasping like swimmers surfacing after a long underwater battle, exhausted yet alive somehow against all odds stacked so heavily against them. Dexter glanced at his trembling hand still clutching pocket watch before turning eyes back onto figure emerging slowly from darkness once more. It was Westley now, in truth. No longer twisted mockery, but familiar face, albeit gaunt and haunted by ordeal they'd both endured. "Is it over?" Westley asked hoarsely, hope flickering weakly like candle flame guttering against harsh winds battering them still. Dexter nodded solemnly. "For us," he agreed softly, gaze drifting upwards towards where last vestiges of light clung tenaciously aloft, above chasm, yawning hungry below. And there, in silence broken only by labored breaths, they stood side by side awaiting whatever dawn might bring upon a world anew when darkness finally yielded. But even as hope kindled once more within breasts, neither man forgot lessons learned beneath sunless canyons, unyielding gaze, nor ever again took solace merely from light alone, without first ensuring shadows held no further sway over them. Dexter Wellwood trudged away from Sunless Canyon, each step heavy with the weight of his decision. The sun hung low in the sky, its last rays casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like supplicating hands, begging him not to leave. But Dexter's resolve held firm. He would not return to the abyss that had claimed Westley and nearly consumed them both. His grandfather's pocket watch lay discarded somewhere behind him, lost amidst the remnants of their shattered expedition. It felt strange, almost sacrilegious, to be rid of it after all these years. Yet there was no denying the profound sense of liberation coursing through his veins. That talisman had once been a lifeline tethering him to sanity. Now, it was just another anchor he'd shed along with the shadows. As he walked, Dexter kept one hand pressed firmly against his chest, fingers splayed wide over his heart. Its rhythm thrummed steadily beneath his palm, a reassuring reminder that he yet lived despite everything. The pounding echo of Westley's desperate cries still rang in his ears, but they were growing fainter with each stride, gradually overtaken by the cacophony of life outside Sunless Canyon. The landscape transformed around him as daylight waned. Once stark and unforgiving, it now softened into gently rolling hills dotted with hardy vegetation clinging tenaciously to existence. The air too underwent a change, no longer heavy and damp, but cool and crisp, carrying the faintest hint of approaching nightfall, rather than suffocating oppression. Yet even amidst this tableau of natural beauty, Dexter remained acutely aware of the darkness lurking within himself. He could feel it coiled tight around his soul like a serpent biding its time, waiting for him to lower his guard before striking again. It was a constant presence now, an unwelcome companion forged from memories etched indelibly upon his mind's eye. He found himself pausing periodically to glance back over his shoulder, half expecting to see Westley staggering after them, eyes hollow and haunted by their shared ordeal. But each time he turned, there was nothing except empty expanse stretching out behind him, punctuated only by the occasional dust devil whirling aimlessly across barren ground. Still, Dexter couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by Westley, but something else entirely. Something ancient and malevolent lurking just beyond perception's edge, reluctant to relinquish its prey so easily. He could almost sense it now, a cold breath against his neck, an icy tendril brushing through his hair. Yet whenever he spun around, there was nothing there. It took hours before Dexter reached the outskirts of civilization once more. As he emerged from wilderness into a small town nestled beside the highway, he felt a profound sense of disorientation wash over him. People bustled about their evening routines, oblivious to the chasm yawning behind him. Cars rumbled past without pause for thought regarding what might lie beyond roadside shoulders. Dexter stood rooted to spot amidst this tableau of normality, wondering how it was possible that life could continue unabated despite horrors festering unseen beneath surface. Then again, hadn't he himself once been blind to such things? Once upon a time, he too had believed in monsters, only as figments of childhood imagination. Now, however, he knew better. A sudden gust of wind whipped through town square, carrying with it a familiar chill that seemed to seep deep into Dexter's bones. He shuddered involuntarily, pulling his jacket tighter around himself despite warm evening air. That sensation of being watched persisted still. Indeed, it felt almost as if their unseen observer had followed him here, tracking his progress like some twisted hunter stalking prey. But why? Why didn't it simply let them go? Dexter mulled over this question absently while purchasing supplies at a convenience store. Foodstuffs mostly, but also basics like toiletries and clothing. He avoided making eye contact with other patrons. He couldn't bear the thought of seeing their reflections mirrored back at him, haunted by echoes of Sunless Canyon's darkness. As he waited for his change, Dexter noticed something peculiar about his hands. They trembled ever so slightly, as if unable to contain some restless energy coursing just beneath skin. It was a small detail, yet one impossible to ignore, serving only to underscore how much he'd changed since entering that godforsaken canyon. That night, Dexter checked into a motel room under false pretenses. He knew sleep wouldn't come easily, if at all, given current circumstances, but figured rest might still prove beneficial nonetheless. Besides, perhaps being cooped up indoors would grant him some respite from that persistent feeling of observation plaguing his every step. Yet despite best intentions, Dexter found himself lying awake for hours, staring up at ceiling fan blades, slicing through dim moonlight filtering past heavy drapes. His mind raced with fragments of memory, Westley's desperate cries echoing down endless corridors, the twisted mockery of ancient artifacts scattered amidst carnage left behind by their shared ordeal, cold stone walls closing in around them like jaws snapping shut on prey. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him despite efforts to remain vigilant. Fitful sleep came punctuated by nightmares, wherein Westley's spectral form chased Dexter through labyrinthine tunnels. Accusing fingers pointed relentlessly at him, while accusing words echoed endlessly through cavernous spaces. "Why did you leave me? Why didn't you come back?" Dexter woke with a start sometime later, heart pounding wildly against ribs as if attempting escape once more. For one disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten here, only that something was very wrong indeed. Then reality crashed down upon him anew. Sunless Canyon, Westley, the artifacts? He stumbled out of bed, barely registering pain from shards of glass embedded deep within his feet. They were remnants of a shattered bedside lamp, now scattered across room floor, amidst toppled furniture and scattered sheets tangled like desperate supplicants. Dexter stood there barefoot amidst destruction wrought by own hands during REM sleep, shock rendering him incapable of movement or coherent thought for several long moments. Then slowly, deliberately, he began picking up broken glass fragments one by one until not a single shard remained visible upon floorboards beneath his trembling fingertips. As dawn broke outside motel room window, Dexter packed his belongings silently before leaving without so much as pausing to settle bill owed. There was no turning back now, nor could there ever be again after what they'd both witnessed within those shadowed depths below Sunless Canyon's yawning maw. The next few days passed in something of a blur for Dexter Wellwood. He drove aimlessly down highways and back roads alike, stopping occasionally at roadside diners or gas stations whenever necessitated by bodily needs, but otherwise maintaining stony silence towards anyone foolish enough to strike up conversation with him. His reflection stared back from rearview mirror each time he glanced into it, gaunt cheeks hollowed out by stress, haunted eyes staring vacantly ahead as if searching for something lost long ago, or perhaps still lingering just beyond reach. Yet despite outward appearances, Dexter remained determined not to succumb entirely to despair lurking within shadows cast by memories of their shared ordeal. It took several weeks before he found himself drawn inexorably back towards that familiar chasm carved into Earth's surface like wound upon flesh refuse, healing no matter how much time passed. He parked his car alongside highway far enough removed from entrance so as not to draw undue attention, but close enough still to feel its dark pull beckoning him ever closer. There, beneath starless night sky stretching infinitely overhead, Dexter stood once more at edge of abyss staring back defiantly at him through darkness. No words passed between them this time. None were needed after all they'd shared together down there, amidst ruins of ancient civilization, swallowed whole by greed and ambition. Instead, Dexter simply reached out with trembling hands towards that vast emptiness before him, fingers brushing against cold stone lip, mere inches separating safety from madness once more. Then, slowly but deliberately, he began to back away step by step until Sunless Canyon receded from view altogether, disappearing behind curve in road, swallowed by night. Then finally, after so many long days plagued by doubt and fear, Dexter Wellwood turned his back on shadows forevermore. He climbed into driver's seat, started engine with steady hand devoid of tremors now, and drove away without looking back again, ever. As first light broke over horizon line ahead, casting golden rays across landscape newly bathed in warmth once more, Dexter felt something shift deep within himself. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible really, but nonetheless undeniable nonetheless. The cold knot of dread coiled tightly around his soul had begun to unravel ever so slightly. Not entirely gone, mind you. No, such a thing would take time indeed before complete release could be hoped for, let alone attained. But still, it was progress nevertheless, Evidence perhaps that healing might yet prove possible after all, despite everything they'd endured together beneath Sunless Canyon's yawning gaze. And so, with renewed purpose burning bright within breast, now too long denied flame, Dexter Wellwood set course eastward towards rising sun, leaving darkness behind him, like discarded shackles once bound tight about wrists and ankles alike. His journey would be far from easy going forward. Indeed, there were bound to be many more challenges lying ahead, still awaiting confrontation before peace could ever truly be attained. But whatever lay ahead, Dexter knew now that he was ready to face it head-on regardless. No longer the frightened boy who'd ventured into canyon depths so long ago, but rather a man reborn from shadows tempered by fire, forged there amidst ruins of their shared past. For though Sunless Canyon might have claimed Westley ultimately, it could never truly possess Dexter Wellwood again. For he had walked away, and in doing so found himself once more bathed in light eternal stretching out before him like endless road leading ever onward into eternity beyond reckoning of mere mortal men, such as themselves once were.